The grand hall of the Silvercrest Kingdom fell silent as Barbara was dragged before the throne, her wrists bound in silver chains that burned against her skin. 300 wolves watched from the gallery, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. She kept her head down, her long dark hair falling forward to hide the terror coursing through her veins. The chains weren't just restraining her, they were suppressing something ancient, something that had been sleeping inside her for 24 years. "Barbara Thorne!" King Nicholas's voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant. "You stand accused of concealing your bloodline, infiltrating this court under false pretenses, and carrying the mark of the Shadowborn traitors. How do you answer these charges?" Her throat constricted. The silver burned hotter, and she felt the thing inside her stir, pushing against the bonds that held it captive. She had spent her entire life hiding what she was, believing herself to be nothing more than a low-born Omega, a servant girl orphaned as an infant and raised in the Pack's kitchens. But 3 days ago, the court's historian had discovered an ancient registry, and everything Barbara thought she knew about herself had shattered. "My king, I swear I knew nothing of my heritage," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was raised as an Omega. I've served this court faithfully for 10 years. Whatever blood runs in my veins, I've done nothing to betray you." Lady Morgana stepped forward from the council seats, her crimson gown sweeping across the marble floor. The king's chief advisor had always looked at Barbara with thinly veiled contempt, and now her eyes gleamed with vindication. "How convenient that you claim ignorance," Morgana said, her voice dripping with scorn. "The Shadowborn nearly destroyed our kingdom 80 years ago. Their queen killed hundreds of our people before she was executed. And now we discover her great-granddaughter has been living among us, working in the palace, close to our king." A ripple of angry murmurs swept through the crowd. Barbara's legs trembled, but she forced herself to remain standing. She had seen what happened to traitors in this court. She had cleaned the blood from these floors. Nicholas rose from his throne, and the room fell silent again. He was magnificent and terrifying, standing 6.5 feet tall with broad shoulders and commanding presence that made even the strongest alphas bow their heads. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp planes of his face and those piercing silver eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Barbara had admired him from afar for years, a foolish Omega's crush on a king who had never noticed her existence until now. He descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing through the vast chamber. Barbara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had heard stories of his fury, of enemies torn apart by his massive black wolf. She had also heard whispers of his honor, his fierce protection of the innocent. She prayed to the moon goddess that the latter would prevail. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that she could smell cedarwood and rain, the scent that had haunted her dreams. "Look at me," he commanded. Barbara lifted her head, forcing herself to meet those silver eyes. The moment their gazes locked, something electric passed between them, a shock of recognition that made her gasp. His eyes widened fractionally, and she saw his nostrils flare as he drew in her scent. For one breathless moment, the entire world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. Then Morgana's voice cut through the tension. "Your Majesty, the law is clear. Any descendant of the Shadowborn line found within our borders must be executed or exiled. We cannot risk another uprising." "She could be a spy," another council member called out. "The Shadowborn could be using her to infiltrate the palace. We should end this now," someone else shouted. One swift execution, and the threat is eliminated. The crowd's energy was turning dangerous. Barbara could feel it building, a mob mentality that would soon overwhelm even the king's authority. She fought against the rising panic, but the silver chains were affecting her differently now. Instead of just burning, they seemed to be compressing something inside her, squeezing it tighter and tighter like a spring being wound to its breaking point. Nicholas raised his hand, and silence fell immediately. "The court will be silent," he said, his voice like thunder. "Barbara Thorne, I am going to ask you questions, and you will answer truthfully. If you lie, I will know." Barbara nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "Did you know about your bloodline before 3 days ago?" "No, my king. I swear on the moon goddess I knew nothing." His eyes searched hers, and she felt that strange pull again, as if invisible threads were connecting them. "Have you ever communicated with the Shadowborn pack or any of their descendants?" "Never. I don't even know where they are." "Have you used any gifts or powers inherited from the Shadowborn line?" This question made her pause. She had always healed faster than other Omegas, had always been stronger than she should be, but she had attributed it to luck, to good genetics. "I don't think so. I've never done anything unusual. I'm just an Omega." Morgana laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "Just an Omega," she repeated. "Your Majesty, with respect, we cannot take her word for it. The Shadowborn were masters of deception. They could hide their true nature even from other werewolves. There's only one way to know for certain what she is." Nicholas's jaw tightened. He turned to face his advisor, and Barbara saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. "Choose your next words carefully, Morgana." The advisor didn't back down. "Force her to shift. Here, before the court. If she truly carries the Shadowborn Queen's blood, her wolf will reveal it. The ancient texts describe the Shadowborn Queen's form in detail. White fur with silver markings, larger than any she-wolf has a right to be, and eyes like blue fire. If Barbara shifts and shows those marks, we'll have our proof. If she doesn't, we'll know she's just a distant relation with diluted blood, and we can decide her fate accordingly." Barbara's stomach dropped. She had never shifted before. Most wolves experienced their first shift during puberty, but hers had never come. The pack healers had told her she was a late bloomer, that some Omegas took longer to develop. She had been waiting for 24 years, believing she was defective, broken somehow. "My king," she said, her voice shaking. "I've never shifted. I don't know how. I don't think I can." Morgana's smile was cruel. "How convenient. She can't shift. What a perfect excuse." "She's hiding it," someone called from the gallery. "Make her shift. The king has the authority." Nicholas was still watching Barbara, his expression unreadable. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the weight of his responsibility to the kingdom warring with something else, something she didn't understand. When he spoke, his voice was softer, meant only for her. "Barbara, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She didn't understand why, but she found herself nodding. There was something in his eyes, a recognition that called to a deep part of her soul. He turned to face the court. "Very well. We will see her wolf. But this will be done with control and dignity, not as a mob spectacle." He gestured, and 2 guards came forward. "Remove the silver chains." Morgana stepped forward quickly. "Your Majesty, that's not wise. If she truly is the Shadowborn Queen's descendant, I am your king, and you will obey me, Nicholas said, his voice dropping to a growl that made even Morgana stumble back. Remove the chains. Now. The guards unlocked the manacles, and Barbara felt immediate relief as the burning silver fell away from her wrists. But the relief lasted only a second before something else rushed in to take its place. Power. Raw, ancient power that had been compressed by the silver chains suddenly expanding like a dam breaking. She gasped, stumbling backward, and Nicholas caught her arms, steadying her. The contact sent another shock through both of them, stronger this time. His eyes widened, and she heard him draw in a sharp breath. Barbara, look at me. Focus on my voice. But she couldn't focus on anything. The power was overwhelming, filling every cell of her body, rewriting her from the inside out. She had never felt anything like this, had never imagined anything like this existed. Her skin felt too tight, her bones aching with the need to change. The thing that had been sleeping inside her was waking up, and it was massive. I can't, she gasped. Something's happening. I can't control it. Yes, you can. I'm right here. I won't let anything happen to you. His hands on her arms were the only anchor in a sea of chaos. She clung to his voice, to his presence, even as her body began to change. The transformation was unlike anything she had expected. Other wolves described their first shift as painful but natural, like slipping into a second skin. This was an explosion. This was a rebirth. Her spine arched, and she heard herself cry out as bones lengthened and reformed. But it wasn't just pain. It was power recognizing itself, claiming its rightful place. Nicholas released her arms and stepped back, giving her space. But she could still feel him nearby, could sense his presence like a beacon. The shift took less than 30 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. When it was complete, Barbara stood on 4 legs in the center of the grand hall, and the silence was absolute. She could see everything with crystal clarity, could smell every individual wolf in the room, could hear their heartbeats and the whisper of their breath. She was taller than she should be, her shoulder reaching the middle of Nicholas's chest. Her fur was pure white, and when she looked down at her legs, she could see the silver markings that spiraled up from her paws like ancient runes. The court historian, an elderly man named Edmund, stood up from his seat, his hands trembling. "Moon goddess, preserve us," he whispered. "It's exactly as the text described. The silver markings are the royal seal of the Shadowborn line. She's not just a descendant. She carries the full bloodline." Barbara could feel the fear rippling through the crowd. She could also feel something else, something vast and terrible stirring in her chest. The wolf inside her was ancient, far older than her human consciousness, and it remembered things that Barbara had never known. It remembered a throne. It remembered power. It remembered a kingdom that had been stolen. Morgana's voice cut through the tension. "There's your proof, Your Majesty. She's everything we feared. Execute her now, before she can—" "Finish that sentence, and you'll find yourself in chains," Nicholas growled, his voice dropping to a register that made every wolf in the room freeze. "No one touches her. Is that understood?" Barbara turned her head to look at him, and their eyes met again. His silver gaze held hers, and she saw no fear there, no revulsion. Instead, saw wonder. She saw recognition, and she saw something else that made her ancient wolf keen with longing. "This changes nothing," Nicholas said, his voice ringing with authority as he spoke to the assembled crowd. "Barbara Thorne has lived among us for 10 years without incident. She has served this court faithfully and without knowledge of her heritage. The sins of her ancestors are not hers to bear." "Your Majesty, you cannot be serious," Morgana protested. "The law demands—" "I am the law," Nicholas said flatly. "And I say, this woman deserves a fair hearing, not a mob execution." He turned back to Barbara, and when he spoke next, his voice was softer, meant only for her. "Can you shift back? I know it's difficult the first time, but I need to speak with you." Barbara tried to access that human part of herself, but the wolf was reluctant to relinquish control. It had been caged for so long, suppressed by whatever magic or genetics had kept it dormant. Now that it was free, it didn't want to go back. She made a sound of frustration, somewhere between a whine and a growl. Nicholas stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I know you're scared. I know this is overwhelming. But you're safe here. I promise you, no one will hurt you. I won't allow it." There was something in his voice, a resonance that reached past her fear and touched something fundamental. The wolf inside her recognized him in a way that Barbara's human mind hadn't yet processed. It recognized him as safety, as home, as something that made the ancient ache in her chest finally make sense. She closed her eyes and reached for her human form. This transition was easier, as if her body was relieved to return to familiar territory. Bones shortened, fur receded, and within moments, she was kneeling on the marble floor, naked and vulnerable before the entire court. Nicholas moved faster than she could track, shrugging out of his ceremonial cloak and wrapping it around her shoulders before anyone else could react. The heavy fabric engulfed her, carrying his scent so strongly that it made her head spin. He helped her to her feet, his hands steady on her arms, and she found herself leaning into his strength because her legs were shaking too badly to support her weight. "Give us the hall," he commanded, his voice brooking no argument. "Your Majesty, surely you don't intend to be alone with—" Morgana began. "Out! All of you! Now!" The force of his alpha command washed over the room like a physical blow. Even the highest-ranking wolves couldn't resist it. They filed out reluctantly, Morgana shooting venomous looks over her shoulder, until only Nicholas and Barbara remained in the vast chamber. The silence that followed was deafening. Barbara clutched the cloak tighter around herself, unable to meet his eyes. She could feel tears threatening to spill over, the weight of the last hour crashing down on her all at once. Her entire life had been a lie. She wasn't who she thought she was. She was the descendant of monsters, of traitors who had tried to destroy this kingdom. And somehow, impossibly, she was standing in the grand hall, wrapped in the king's cloak, while he looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to cause trouble. I never wanted to be a threat to you or your kingdom. If you need to exile me, I understand. I'll leave tonight. I'll go somewhere far away where no one knows my name." "Exile you?" Nicholas repeated, and there was something almost like pain in his voice. "Barbara, look at me. Please." She forced herself to lift her head, and what she saw in his eyes stole her breath. There was no anger there, no disgust. Instead, there was a hunger that made her pulse race, a possessive intensity that should have frightened her, but instead made her feel safer than she had ever felt in her life. "Do you know what you are to me?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. His palm was warm against her cheek, and she found herself leaning into the touch like a flower turning toward the sun. "You're my mate, Barbara. My fated mate. I've been searching for you for 10 years, and you've been here the entire time, hidden right under my nose." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. Omegas didn't have fated mates. That was the gift of alphas and betas, the moon goddess's blessing reserved for those with strong bloodlines. Barbara was nothing, nobody, just a servant girl who happened to carry cursed blood. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I'm an Omega. Omegas don't have mates." "You're not an Omega, Barbara. You never were. Your wolf was suppressed, probably by some ancestral magic meant to protect you. But now that she's awake, can't you feel it? Can't you feel the bond between us?" She could feel something, a pull toward him that went beyond attraction, beyond logic. It was as if invisible threads connected her heart to his, as if some fundamental part of her recognized him as essential as breathing. But accepting that felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown darkness. "Even if that's true," she said, her voice shaking, "it doesn't change what I am. I'm the great-granddaughter of the woman who tried to destroy your kingdom. I carry the blood of traitors and murderers. You can't possibly want me as your mate. Your court will never accept it." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Then my court will have to adapt," he said simply. "You are mine, Barbara. The moon goddess chose you for me, and I will not reject her gift. I will not reject you." "Nicholas, please listen to reason. Morgana was right about one thing. The Shadowborn queen killed hundreds of people. She nearly brought this kingdom to its knees. How can you trust that I won't become like her?" "Because I've spent the last hour watching you," he said, his silver eyes intense. "You were terrified, facing execution, and your first instinct was to apologize. You didn't threaten or rage or demand justice for the hand you were dealt. You were ready to accept exile to protect this kingdom from any danger you might pose. That is not the behavior of a tyrant, Barbara. That is the behavior of someone with a good and noble heart." His words cracked something open inside her chest, releasing a flood of emotions she had been holding back. She had spent so many years believing she was worthless, a defective Omega who would never be anything more than a servant. And now this powerful, magnificent king was looking at her as if she was precious, as if she mattered, as if she was his entire world. "I don't know how to be a queen," she whispered. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I've always been." "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. "I will teach you everything you need to know. I will protect you from those who would use your heritage against you. And I will spend every day of my life showing you that you are worthy of being loved, of being cherished, of standing at my side as my equal." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Barbara had spent years watching him from the shadows, had seen him make decisions for his kingdom with wisdom and compassion. She had never seen him be cruel without cause, had never seen him abuse his power. If anyone could help her navigate this impossible situation, it was him. She took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. What happens now? Your court is terrified of me. Half of them want me dead. Now we show them that you are not a threat, Nicholas said, his tone shifting to something more calculated. We will research your bloodline thoroughly. We will learn everything we can about the Shadowborn Queen and what led her to betray this kingdom. And we will prove that you are nothing like her. And if we can't prove that? What if the court demands my execution anyway? His expression hardened, and she saw the dangerous alpha that made enemies tremble. Then I will make it very clear that anyone who threatens my mate threatens me directly, he said, his voice dropping to a growl. I am the king, Barbara. My word is law. And I say that you are under my personal protection. Anyone who harms you will answer to me. The possessive declaration sent heat flooding through her body. Her newly awakened wolf purred with satisfaction, recognizing the alpha's claim. But her human mind was still reeling, still trying to process the enormity of what was happening. The court won't accept me, she said quietly. Morgana has too much influence, and too many wolves remember the war with the Shadowborn. They'll see me as a threat no matter what we do. Let me worry about Morgana, Nicholas said, a hint of steel in his voice. She's been pushing for more power in the court for years, and this situation has given her an opportunity to challenge my authority. But I have no intention of letting her succeed. He guided her gently toward the throne, and she realized how exhausted she was. The transformation had drained her, and the emotional whiplash of the last hour had left her feeling hollowed out. He settled her on the steps of the dais, sitting beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. I want to tell you something, he said, his voice softer now. When I first took the throne 10 years ago, I was young and arrogant. I thought being king meant making the hard decisions, doing what was necessary for the kingdom, even if it meant sacrificing personal happiness. I convinced myself that I didn't need a mate, that I was stronger alone. He turned to look at her, and the raw honesty in his eyes made her chest ache. I was wrong. I've been incomplete all this time, and I didn't even realize it. There was always something missing, some part of me that felt hollow no matter how many victories I achieved or how stable the kingdom became. And then today, when I looked into your eyes for the first time, everything clicked into place. You filled that hollow space, Barbara. You made me whole. She felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, but this time they weren't from fear or grief. They were from the overwhelming realization that she wasn't alone anymore, that she had found someone who saw her, truly saw her, and didn't turn away. I've admired you for so long, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. From the shadows, watching you lead with such strength and compassion, I never imagined you would even notice me, let alone that we could be mates. It feels like a dream. This is no dream, he said, taking her hand in his. This is fate, and I will not waste it. You are my mate, my queen, and I will move heaven and earth to make sure you're safe and happy. The sound of footsteps approaching made them both tense. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Edmund, the court historian, entered carrying a stack of ancient books. The elderly wolf looked anxious but determined. Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty, Edmund said, bowing low, but I believe I've found something important. May I approach? Nicholas nodded, and the historian climbed the steps to join them, spreading out several volumes on the marble floor. The pages were yellowed with age, covered in elegant script and detailed illustrations. I've been researching the Shadowborn Queen since the registry was discovered, Edmund explained, his gnarled fingers tracing the ancient text. And I believe we've been operating under false assumptions about what actually happened 80 years ago. Barbara leaned forward, trying to decipher the old language. Nicholas's hand found hers again, his fingers intertwining with hers in silent support. The official histories tell us that Queen Ravenna of the Shadowborn turned against this kingdom without cause, that she was consumed by ambition and tried to claim the throne through violence. But these older texts, written by neutral chroniclers from neighboring kingdoms, tell a different story. He turned to a page marked with a ribbon, pointing to an illustration of a beautiful woman with long dark hair and piercing blue eyes. Barbara felt a shock of recognition. The woman looked like her. Or rather, she looked like the woman. According to these accounts, Queen Ravenna was betrothed to King Aldrich, Nicholas's great-grandfather. The marriage was meant to unite the two most powerful bloodlines in the kingdom, creating an unbreakable alliance. But Aldrich broke the betrothal to marry someone else, a she-wolf from a lesser house who he claimed was his fated mate. Edmund looked up from the text, his expression grave. Ravenna felt betrayed, not just personally but on behalf of her entire line. The Shadowborn had negotiated in good faith, had given concessions and territories to make the alliance work. When Aldrich rejected her, it wasn't just a romantic slight. It was a political catastrophe that left the Shadowborn vulnerable to their enemies. Nicholas's grip on Barbara's hand tightened. Are you saying my great-grandfather provoked the war? I'm saying the situation was more complex than the official histories suggest, Edmund replied. Ravenna did attack the kingdom, and she did kill innocents. Those facts are undeniable. But she was not an unprovoked aggressor. She was a woman scorned, and a queen whose people were suffering because of a broken promise. Barbara felt her throat tighten. She had expected to find a monster in her family tree, but instead, she was finding a woman who had been hurt and desperate. It didn't excuse what Ravenna had done, but it made her more human, more understandable. What happened to her? Barbara asked quietly. Edmund's expression turned somber. She was captured after a 3-year war. King Aldrich offered her exile if she would swear never to return. But she refused. She said she would rather die than abandon her people to their fate. So Aldrich executed her publicly, and the remaining Shadowborn were scattered to the winds. And her descendants went into hiding. Nicholas finished, his voice thoughtful. They suppressed their bloodlines, made themselves invisible, all to protect their children from being hunted down. Exactly. The magic that kept Barbara's wolf dormant was likely cast by one of her ancestors to ensure she could live a normal life, free from the stigma of her heritage. Barbara felt something shift inside her. A weight she hadn't even known she was carrying suddenly lifting. She wasn't the descendant of a monster. She was the descendant of a queen who had made terrible choices out of desperation and betrayal. It didn't erase the blood on her family tree, but it gave context. It gave understanding. We need to make this information public, Nicholas said, standing and helping Barbara to her feet. The court needs to understand the full history, not just the propaganda that's been passed down through generations. Your Majesty, with respect, are you certain that's wise? Edmund asked. This information casts your own great-grandfather in a negative light. It could undermine the foundation of your rule. My rule is built on truth and justice, Nicholas said firmly. If that means acknowledging the mistakes of my ancestors, so be it. Barbara deserves to have her name cleared, and the memory of Queen Ravenna deserves to be more than just a cautionary tale about ambition. He turned to Barbara, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. You are not responsible for what your great-grandmother did, but you have the opportunity to write a different ending to her story, to show this kingdom that the Shadowborn bloodline can be a force for good, for healing, for unity. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that, she whispered. You are, he said, cupping her face in both hands. You survived 10 years as an Omega when you were meant to be a queen. You faced death with grace and dignity. You have more strength than you know, Barbara, and you won't be alone. I'll be with you every step of the way. The doors burst open again, but this time it wasn't the gentle historian. Morgana stormed in, flanked by 6 council members, her face twisted with rage. This is madness, she spat, pointing an accusing finger at Barbara. You cannot seriously intend to keep her alive, much less make her your mate. The court will rebel. The people will demand justice for the crimes of her bloodline. Nicholas released Barbara and turned to face the council, his entire demeanor shifting from gentle mate to alpha king. The change was so complete that even Morgana took a step back. The court will accept my decision, or they will find themselves seeking new positions, he said, his voice like ice. I am not asking for your permission, Morgana. I am informing you of my choice. Then you're a fool, Morgana shot back, though her voice wavered slightly. This woman could destroy everything we've built. Her very existence is a threat to the stability of this kingdom. The only threat I see right now is you challenging my authority in my own hall, Nicholas growled, and power radiated from him in palpable waves. I have been patient with your political maneuvering, Morgana, because you are a capable administrator. But if you force me to choose between your service and my mate, I will choose her every single time. Are we clear? The assembled council members looked uncertain, glancing between their king and his chief advisor. Barbara could see the calculation in their eyes, the weighing of loyalty against ambition. Morgana had clearly expected more support, had thought she could leverage this situation to increase her own power. But Nicholas's absolute stance had shattered her strategy. You will regret this, Morgana said coldly. When the kingdom turns against you, when the people rise up demanding the Shadowborn heir's head, you will remember this moment. Get out of my sight, Nicholas said flatly, and consider carefully whether you wish to remain on this council. I will not tolerate threats against my mate from anyone, regardless of their position. Morgana's face flushed red, but she had enough self-preservation to recognize when she was beaten. She spun on her heel and stalked out, her supporters trailing behind her. The heavy doors slammed shut, the sound echoing through the empty hall. Nicholas's shoulders sagged slightly, and Barbara realized just how much energy it had taken for him to maintain that level of dominance. She moved to his side instinctively, her hand finding his arm. The contact seemed to steady him, and when he looked down at her, some of the hardness left his expression. Are you okay? She asked softly. She was your advisor. That couldn't have been easy. Morgana has been pushing for this confrontation for months, he said, his voice tired. She wants power, and she saw my lack of a mate as weakness. This situation with you just gave her an excuse to make her move. She's not going to give up. No, she's not, which means we need to move quickly. He took both her hands, his silver eyes intense. Barbara, I know this is sudden. I know you've been through hell today, and you barely know me beyond watching from a distance. But I need you to trust me. Will you accept the mate bond? Will you let me mark you and bind our souls together before the next moon?" Her heart raced. It was sudden, impossibly sudden. But everything about this day had been impossible, and when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see a king making a political calculation. She saw her mate, the other half of her soul, asking her to take a leap of faith. "Yes," she whispered, and then stronger. "Yes, I'll accept the bond." The smile that broke across his face was devastating, transforming him from a stern king into something younger, more vulnerable. He pulled her into his arms and she melted against his chest, feeling his heart thundering against hers. His scent surrounded her, cedarwood and rain and something uniquely him that made her wolf sing with joy. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "I swear to you, Barbara, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this decision." "I couldn't regret it," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "This is the first time in my life I've felt like I belong somewhere, like I'm meant to be somewhere. With you, I feel like I've finally come home." He pulled back just enough to tilt her chin up, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, but it quickly deepened as the mate bond flared between them. Heat coursed through Barbara's veins, and she felt her wolf rising to the surface, eager to claim her mate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nicholas rested his forehead against hers. "The moon goddess knew what she was doing when she made you for me," he said quietly. "You're perfect, Barbara. Absolutely perfect." The next 3 days passed in a blur. Nicholas insisted that Barbara move into the royal quarters immediately, both for her protection and to make their relationship clear to the court. He assigned her a personal guard of 6 loyal wolves who would die before they let anyone harm her. He also brought in tutors to begin teaching her everything she would need to know as future queen, from court protocols to kingdom history to diplomatic strategies. Morgana made her displeasure known at every opportunity, but she was careful to stay within the bounds of acceptable behavior. She couldn't challenge the king openly without committing treason, but she could make life difficult through bureaucratic obstacles and spreading doubt among the courtiers. Barbara found herself under constant scrutiny. Every move she made was watched, judged, reported on. The kitchen staff, who had once been her friends, now looked at her with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. The nobles, who had never noticed her existence, now studied her openly, searching for any sign of the monster they expected her to be. It would have been unbearable except for Nicholas. He was her constant support, her shield against the worst of the court's hostility. He made a point of showing her affection publicly, holding her hand during council meetings, pulling her close during formal dinners, making it clear to everyone that she was his chosen mate, and they would accept her or face his wrath. On the 3rd night, as they sat together in his private chambers, reviewing petitions from the outer territories, Barbara finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. "Do you ever doubt this?" she asked quietly, setting down the parchment she'd been reading. "Do you ever wonder if you made a mistake choosing me?" Nicholas looked up from his own work, his expression immediately concerned. He set aside his papers and moved to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her hands in his. "Never," he said with absolute conviction. "Not once, not for a single moment. Why would you think that?" "Because I see how hard this is making things for you. Morgana is undermining you at every turn. Half the court thinks you've lost your mind. The other half is waiting to see if I'll betray you. And I'm just a servant girl who doesn't know the first thing about being a queen. You're not just anything, he said, reaching up to cup her face. You're my mate, my equal, my future queen. And yes, this is difficult. Yes, there are people who oppose us. But do you know what I see when I look at you? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. I see a woman who has survived impossible odds. I see someone who could have become bitter and resentful from years of being treated as lesser, but who instead remained kind and compassionate. I see someone who is learning to be a queen in 3 days, what takes most nobles a lifetime to master. You are extraordinary, Barbara, and I am honored that you chose me. You saved my life, she whispered. If you hadn't been there that day in the hall, if you hadn't protected me, I would be dead right now. I would burn this entire kingdom to the ground before I let anyone harm you, he said, his voice dropping to a growl. You are mine, Barbara. Mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to love. And I take that responsibility seriously. The intensity in his eyes made her shiver. She had never been the focus of someone's complete attention before, had never been valued like this. It was overwhelming and terrifying and absolutely wonderful. Then mark me, she said, surprising herself with her own daring. Tonight, right now, I don't want to wait anymore. I want everyone to know I'm yours. His eyes darkened, and she felt his wolf rise to the surface, responding to her challenge. Barbara, are you certain? Once I mark you, there's no going back. We'll be bound for life. I'm certain. I've never been more certain of anything. He didn't need to be told twice. He pulled her into his lap, one hand tangling in her hair, while the other wrapped around her waist. When he kissed her this time, there was no gentleness, no hesitation. This was claiming, possessing, making her his in the most fundamental way. She felt his teeth graze her neck, and her whole body arched in response. The bite, when it came, was a sharp sting followed by overwhelming pleasure. Power flowed between them, the mate bond snapping into place with an almost audible click. She could feel him in her mind now, could sense his emotions, his fierce protectiveness, his absolute devotion. When he pulled back, his eyes were glowing silver, and she knew hers must be glowing blue. You're mine now, he said, his voice rough with emotion. My mate, my queen, my everything. And you're mine, she replied, feeling stronger and more powerful than she ever had. My alpha, my king, my home. They stayed wrapped in each other's arms for a long time, neither wanting to break the moment. But eventually, reality intruded. There was still so much to be done, so many battles yet to fight. The next morning, Nicholas called a formal assembly of the entire court. Everyone who held rank or position in the kingdom was required to attend. The grand hall was packed with wolves from every territory, all buzzing with speculation about why they had been summoned. Barbara stood at Nicholas's side on the dais, wearing the deep blue gown he had commissioned for her. The bite mark on her neck was clearly visible, announced their completed bond to everyone who looked at her. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers, but with Nicholas's hand in hers and their bond thrumming between them, she felt strong enough to face anything. Nicholas raised his hand, and the hall fell silent. Members of the court, nobles of the realm, I have called you here today to make an announcement. 3 days ago, you witnessed me discover my fated mate. Last night, I completed the bond. I present to you Barbara, formerly Thorn, now Silvercrest, my mate and your future queen. A ripple of reaction went through the crowd, some gasps of surprise, some murmurs of approval, some sounds of dissent. Morgana stood in the front row, her expression carefully neutral, but Barbara could see the rage simmering beneath the surface. I am aware that many of you have concerns about Barbara's heritage. I am aware of the history between this kingdom and the Shadowborn line. And I am here to tell you that we have been operating under false assumptions. He gestured to Edmund, who stepped forward carrying the ancient texts. Over the next 20 minutes, the historian laid out the true story of what had happened 80 years ago, supported by documents from neutral sources and primary accounts that had been hidden in the archives. The revelation was met with shock and disbelief. Many wolves had never questioned the official narrative, had accepted that the Shadowborn Queen was simply evil. Learning that King Aldrich had broken his promise, that he had provoked the war through his actions, fundamentally changed how they viewed the conflict. My great-grandfather made a choice that led to the deaths of hundreds of wolves on both sides. He broke a sacred promise and then tried to erase his culpability by painting Queen Ravenna as a monster. I cannot change what he did, but I can acknowledge it. I can make sure that the Shadowborn line receives the justice they were denied. He turned to Barbara, and the love in his eyes was visible to everyone in the hall. Barbara is not responsible for the actions of her ancestor. But even if she were, even if Queen Ravenna had been the monster we believed her to be, I would still choose Barbara. She is my mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself. Anyone who cannot accept that is welcome to leave my court. The challenge hung in the air. This was the moment of truth. The moment when his nobles would either stand with him or against him. Barbara held her breath, waiting. One by one, wolves began to kneel. It started with Edmund, the elderly historian, bowing his head in respect. Then the captain of the guard, a grizzled warrior who had served the crown for 40 years. Then nobles from the outer territories, wolves who valued tradition and the sanctity of mate bonds above politics. Within minutes, nearly the entire court had knelt, acknowledging Barbara as their future queen. Only a handful remained standing, Morgana among them, their expressions defiant. Nicholas looked at them calmly. For those who cannot, in good conscience, serve under these circumstances, I release you from your oaths. You may leave the kingdom with my blessing and your honor intact. But make no mistake, if you choose to stay and plot against my mate, you will be treated as traitors. Morgana's jaw clenched. She looked around at her fellow dissenters, clearly trying to gauge whether they had enough support for an open rebellion. But she was smart enough to read the room. The majority had already chosen their side, and it wasn't hers. Your Majesty, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. I request permission to retire to my family estates. I find I no longer have the stomach for court politics. Permission granted. You may leave within the hour. Morgana gave a stiff bow, shot one last poisonous look at Barbara, and swept from the hall. 3 other nobles followed her, but the rest, who had been standing, slowly, reluctantly, knelt. Nicholas helped Barbara descend from the dais, and together they walked through the rows of kneeling wolves. As they passed, Each one lifted their head to meet Barbara's eyes, offering the traditional pledge of loyalty to their future queen. When they reached the end of the hall, Nicholas turned to face the assembly. "Rise, all of you. Thank you for your loyalty and your trust. This kingdom is stronger because of you, and it will be stronger still with Barbara at my side." The hall erupted in applause, and Barbara felt tears streaming down her face. Just 4 days ago, she had been nobody, an Omega servant invisible to everyone around her. Now she was standing before the entire court as Nicholas's acknowledged mate, accepted by his people, on her way to becoming a queen. Nicholas pulled her close, uncaring of their audience. "You did it," he murmured against her hair. "You won them over." "We did it," she corrected, looking up at him with shining eyes. "Together." "Together," he agreed. "Always together, from now until the end of our days." He kissed her there, in front of everyone, claiming her publicly one final time, and the court's applause grew even louder. Barbara kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope for the future into that single moment. When they finally broke apart, she looked out at the assembled wolves and saw acceptance, saw respect, even saw some friendly faces in the crowd. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, more people who questioned her right to stand beside their king. But with Nicholas at her side, and the ancient power of the Shadowborn bloodline awakening inside her, Barbara knew she could face anything. She was no longer the scared servant girl who had been dragged before the throne in chains. She was a queen in the making, a mate to a powerful alpha, and a living bridge between the kingdom's past and its future. As they walked back toward the royal quarters hand in hand, Barbara felt her wolf stir contentedly inside her. The ancient queen who had been sleeping for so long was finally at peace, finally home. And Barbara herself, after 24 years of believing she was nobody, had finally found where she belonged. The moon goddess had indeed known what she was doing. And Barbara sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the twisted path that had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life she never could have imagined for herself. She was Barbara Silvercrest now, mate to King Nicholas and soon to be queen of the realm. And she was ready for whatever came next, because she wouldn't be facing it alone. Did you like the story? Do you want a part 2? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, tell us which state you're watching from so I can give you a shout out in the next video. Shout out to our friends from Milan, New Mexico, Kansas, Texas, Xenia, Ohio, Western North Carolina, Massachusetts, Queensland, Australia, Lewis, Scotland, Central Florida, San Jose, California, and more. Don't forget to subscribe so you can stay updated on our next uploads. Thanks for watching.